If you think you know Mike Tyson's story, think again, because the most dangerous fights he ever faced didn't happen under arena lights. They happened behind locked steel doors where there were no referees, no ropes, and no cameras to capture what really went down. In prison, reputation means everything, but it can also make you a target. And when Mike Tyson walked into that cell block, he wasn't just another inmate. He was a legend, a predator in a cage full of predators. What happened next was something most people have never heard, something that nearly shattered him, not physically, but mentally. And tonight, we're uncovering the untold conflicts and fights Mike Tyson faced in jail. The first day was silent, not respectful silent, calculated silent. The kind where every pair of eyes measures you without blinking. In prison, fame doesn't protect you, it tests you. Some inmates saw opportunity, others saw a challenge. A few saw a chance to make a name for themselves by stepping to the former heavyweight champion. Tyson understood that immediately. He had grown up in chaos. He knew what tension felt like. But this was different. There were no gloves here, no rounds, just survival. Whispers started before sunset. That's him. You think he still got it? I'd test him. In prison, someone always tests you, and it didn't take long. A tall, heavily built inmate known for running his unit decided that Tyson's presence disrupted the order. Respect in prison is territorial. The man confronted Tyson during yard time, chest out, voice loud enough for everyone to hear. He wasn't asking a question, he was issuing a warning disguised as small talk. Tyson didn't flinch. He didn't posture. He didn't need to. That calmness unsettled people more than aggression ever could. But tension escalated fast. Words turned sharper. The crowd tightened in a circle. Guards watched, but they don't stop everything immediately. Sometimes they let dominance establish itself. And in that moment, everyone waited to see if Iron Mike would still be iron without the ring. Before I tell you what happened next, make sure you hit that subscribe button and like this video. Because what unfolded in that prison yard changed the way even the toughest inmates looked at Mike Tyson forever. The first swing didn't come from Tyson. It came from ego. But what happened after that proved something no headline ever captured. Prison fights aren't about victory. They're about message. And Tyson delivered one without saying a word. The punch came fast and reckless, thrown more for spectacle than precision. It sliced through the air towards Tyson's jaw, the crowd leaning forward in anticipation of seeing whether the former champion would crumble or respond. But Tyson didn't crumble. He moved with instinct that never left him, a subtle slip of the head, a shift of weight, years of muscle memory awakening in a place where it shouldn't have mattered, but suddenly mattered more than ever. In one controlled motion, Tyson stepped inside the man's reach, not wild, not dramatic, just efficient. His fist drove forward with compact force, a short hook that carried more message than violence. The impact echoed louder than the yard's noise. The challenger stumbled back, stunned, not just by pain, but by realization. This wasn't a retired celebrity playing tough. This was a fighter who understood timing, distance, and fear. The circle broke instantly. Guards rushed in, shouts erupted. Some inmates laughed nervously, others stared in silence. The man who had tried to establish dominance was on one knee, blinking hard, pride shattered more than his balance. Tyson didn't chase him, didn't gloat. He simply stepped back and waited for the guards to separate them. That restraint spoke louder than the punch itself. In prison, violence spreads fast if unchecked, but respect spreads faster. By nightfall, the whispers had changed tone. They weren't asking if Tyson still had it. They were warning others not to test him. The yard had witnessed something important. He wasn't there to conquer anyone. He was there to survive, and he would not be bullied. But the first conflict is never the last, because once you establish power, you also establish enemies, and prison politics are deeper than one-on-one fights. Alliances matter, territories matter. Tyson soon learned that his brief clash had disrupted more than one man's ego. It had disrupted a hierarchy. Days later, tension returned, but quieter this time. Subtle glances, conversations that stopped when he approached. A group that controlled certain privileges wasn't pleased. Tyson wasn't part of any faction. He kept to himself, read books, trained in small spaces, shadow-boxed in silence. That independence made leaders uneasy. Pause, pointed. Neutrality can be perceived as defiance. One evening during chow, a tray slid off the table near him. Knowing, it wasn't an accident. Sharp, a test, again. Pause, this time psychological. Would he react? Would he escalate? Slow and deliberate, Tyson looked at the food scattered on the floor, then slowly looked up. The room waited. Tyson picked up his tray calmly and moved to another seat without saying a word. That move confused people more than a punch ever could. He wasn't avoiding conflict. He was choosing when it mattered. And that choice began to change how some inmates saw him, not just as a fighter, but as someone trying to master something deeper inside himself. But prison doesn't allow peace for long, because while some began to respect his silence, others interpreted it as vulnerability. And what happened one night in the cell block nearly pushed Tyson into the most dangerous fight of all, not against another inmate, but against his own anger. The night it almost exploded began with silence, the kind of silence that hums beneath fluorescent lights and concrete walls. Tyson was in his cell, seated on the narrow bunk, a paperback open in his hands. He had started reading to slow his mind, to cage the chaos that once ruled him. Outside his bars, footsteps echoed, uneven and deliberate. He didn't look up immediately. In prison, reacting too quickly can invite more trouble than ignoring something. But then the voices came. Low at first, then clearer. "Champion reading bedtime stories now?" A few chuckles followed. Tyson closed the book gently and stood. 3 inmates stopped outside his cell. Not random men. Organized. Backed by one of the yard's informal leaders, the same faction unsettled by his refusal to join them. "You don't pick sides," one of them said. "That makes you a problem." Tyson stepped closer to the bars. His expression didn't change. "I'm not here for sides," he replied calmly. "I'm here to do my time." One of the men spat near the door. "Everybody's here to do time, but everybody belongs to somebody." That sentence hung heavy. It wasn't a threat yet. It was a rule, an unspoken code. Tyson understood something in that moment. Neutrality in prison isn't freedom. It's isolation. Later that week, the isolation turned into setup. In the laundry area, a blind corner rarely watched carefully, Tyson felt it before he saw it. A shift in air, movement behind him. He pivoted instinctively just as a towel wrapped around a forearm swung toward his neck, concealing a makeshift weight hidden inside. The attack wasn't loud. It was precise. Tyson ducked, the object grazing his shoulder instead of his throat. Another inmate lunged from the side. This wasn't about ego anymore. This was about removing him. What followed wasn't a spectacle. It was tight, controlled survival. Tyson moved in close, neutralizing space. He trapped one attacker against the wall, deflecting another swing with his forearm. His punches were short and devastating. Not theatrical, not excessive. Just enough to end momentum. Within seconds, guards stormed in. Alarms blared. Both attackers were restrained. Tyson stood breathing heavily, back against cold concrete. No smile, no celebration, just the familiar pulse of adrenaline he thought he had left behind. That night in his cell, he didn't sleep. Because the fight wasn't what shook him. It was how natural it felt.
For years, Tyson had battled the narrative that he was nothing more than violence wrapped in talent. In prison, stripped of fame and fortune, he feared proving that narrative right. Every time he defended himself, he wondered, am I protecting my life or feeding my past?
And here's the truth most people don't realize. Tyson's biggest opponent in jail wasn't another inmate. It was restraint. If you are still watching right now, it means you understand this story isn't just about fists. It's about transformation under pressure. And if you want more stories that go deeper than headlines, take a second to like this video and subscribe, because what happened next challenged Tyson in a way no physical fight ever could. After the laundry incident, something unexpected shifted. Word spread that he hadn't chased revenge. He hadn't asked for retaliation. He hadn't aligned with rival groups for protection. Instead, he kept training quietly, focusing on discipline. One afternoon, an older inmate approached him in the yard, not aggressively, thoughtfully. "You fight like you're trying not to," the man observed. Tyson looked at him carefully. "Maybe I am." That conversation sparked something different. Respect without intimidation, influence without violence. And slowly, a small circle began forming. Not a gang, not a faction, but men who wanted to train, to learn control instead of chaos. But prison environments don't reward change easily, because when one man chooses discipline over destruction, it exposes everyone still clinging to fear. And that exposure would soon ignite the most dangerous conflict Tyson faced behind bars. Change in prison doesn't arrive with applause. It arrives with suspicion. The small training circle that began forming around Tyson was never meant to challenge anyone. Peaceful imagery. It started with early mornings in the yard, push-ups before count, shadow boxing in silence, breathing drills against the cold dawn air. No speeches, no recruitment, just discipline. But discipline can look like defiance to the wrong eyes. Within weeks, more inmates began joining the workouts, not because they worshipped him, because they saw something different. Tyson wasn't glorifying violence, he was controlling it. He corrected stances, he talked about footwork, about balance, about protecting your center. But sometimes, in between combinations, he would say things that had nothing to do with boxing. Power without control is weakness. Anger is easy. Control is strength. Men who'd built their identities on intimidation started listening to conversations about patience, and that threatened the unofficial order. The faction leader who had once tried to recruit Tyson watched from a distance. His influence depended on fear and loyalty. Realization. Tyson was creating something that didn't require either. He wasn't asking for allegiance. He was offering structure. One evening, a message arrived indirectly. A younger inmate approached Tyson near the weight pile. "They want to talk," he said quietly. Tyson nodded once. The meeting took place in a corner of the yard, under the watchful eyes of cameras that rarely worked properly. The faction leader stepped forward, 2 men behind him. He didn't shout, he didn't posture. "You're building something," he said calmly. Tyson met his gaze. "I'm building discipline." "You're building independence," the man corrected. "That makes people question things." Tyson didn't deny it. A long pause followed. Wind scraped dust across concrete. The leader stepped closer. "You think you're helping them," he continued, "but hope is dangerous in here. It makes men forget where they are." Tyson answered evenly. "Maybe remembering where we are is the problem." For a moment, tension tightened the air. Not the explosive kind, the strategic kind. The leader studied him carefully. "You're different now," he said, "but don't confuse growth with safety." The message was clear. This wasn't over. Days later, it escalated, not with fists, but with isolation.
Tyson's workout corp began receiving threats. Some were warned to stop attending, others were pressured quietly. Participation dropped. Tyson noticed. He could have confronted it directly, could have reignited the cycle. Instead, he made a decision that surprised even himself. He stopped leading publicly. For a week, he trained alone again. No speeches, no circle, just solitary discipline. And slowly, something unexpected happened. A few men continued training on their own, then a few more, then a few more, without Tyson organizing it. The movement had outgrown him. That realization hit deeper than any punch he had ever thrown. For years, Tyson's presence had been the center of every room, either feared or admired. Now, change was happening without him needing to dominate it. But prison doesn't allow peace for long. Late one night, alarms shattered the quiet. A fight broke out in a different block, brutal and chaotic. Rumors spread quickly. Retaliations began forming. Lines were being drawn between groups. And someone had decided Tyson needed to choose a side. A guard unlocked his cell unexpectedly and escorted him to a meeting room. Inside waited the warden and 2 senior officers. Their expressions were serious.
"You've become influential," the warden said directly, "whether you intended to or not." Tyson remained silent. "There's tension rising. We need stability. And like it or not, people listen to you." Tyson understood the weight of that statement. For years, authority figures had controlled him. Now authority was asking for his help. The warden leaned forward. "You can calm this, or you can let it burn." This wasn't a physical fight. This was a test of leadership. Tyson left that room carrying a different kind of pressure. If violence erupted across the yard, lives could change permanently. And whether he wanted it or not, he now had influence. That night, instead of retreating into silence, Tyson walked the yard during open hours. He spoke quietly to different groups. No threats, no grand speeches. Just simple words about consequences, about time added to sentences, about mothers waiting outside those walls. Some listened, some didn't. But something shifted. The riot never happened. The tension cooled, not completely, but enough. For the first time, Tyson wasn't feared for what he could destroy. He was respected for what he prevented. And that was the hardest fight of all. Respect in prison is fragile. It doesn't come with applause, and it doesn't stay because you earned it once. It has to be reinforced, not with fear, but with consistency. After the tension cooled and the potential riot dissolved before it could ignite, something subtle changed in the atmosphere. Tyson noticed it during chow time. Conversations didn't stop when he walked by anymore. They didn't need to. The energy wasn't defensive. It was observant. "You've become influential," the warden said directly, "whether you intended to or not." Tyson remained silent. "There's tension rising. We need stability. And like it or not, people listen to you." Tyson understood the weight of that statement. For years, authority figures had controlled him. Now authority was asking for his help. The warden leaned forward. "You can calm this, or you can let it burn." This wasn't a physical fight. This was a test of leadership. Tyson left that room carrying a different kind of pressure. If violence erupted across the yard, lives could change permanently. And whether he wanted it or not, he now had influence. That night, instead of retreating into silence, Tyson walked the yard during open hours. He spoke quietly to different groups. No threats, no grand speeches. Just simple words about consequences, about time added to sentences, about mothers waiting outside those walls. Some listened, some didn't. But something shifted. The riot never happened. The tension cooled, not completely, but enough. For the first time, Tyson wasn't feared for what he could destroy. He was respected for what he prevented. And that was the hardest fight of all. Respect in prison is fragile. It doesn't come with applause, and it doesn't stay because you earned it once. It has to be reinforced,
not with fear, but with consistency. After the tension cooled and the potential riot dissolved before it could ignite, something subtle changed in the atmosphere. Tyson noticed it during chow time. Conversations didn't stop when he walked by anymore. They didn't need to. The energy wasn't defensive. It was observant.
The faction leader who once saw him as a threat approached again, this time alone. "You kept it from going bad," he said quietly. Tyson shrugged. Nobody wins when it goes bad. The man studied him. "You could have used it." Tyson understood what he meant. Chaos creates power vacuums. Power vacuums create opportunity. In his old life, he might have exploited that. In this life, he let it pass. "I've used enough chaos already," Tyson replied. There was no handshake, no dramatic resolution, just a nod. In prison language, that was acknowledgement. But the true conflict Tyson faced wasn't with other inmates anymore. It was with himself. Nights remained the hardest. When the lights dimmed and the noise faded into distant echoes, memories surfaced. Fights he had won, fights he had lost, headlines that painted him as monster or machine. In that silence, reputation meant nothing. Only reflection remained. One night, a younger inmate named Carter, serving a long sentence, spoke up from the bunk across the cell during temporary housing reassignment. "Did you ever feel scared?" Carter asked in the dark. Tyson didn't answer immediately. The old version of him would have dismissed the question. Strength was supposed to be fearless. "Yeah," Tyson finally said. "All the time." Carter shifted. "Of losing?" Pause. Deeper truth. "Of being nothing without the fight." That confession hung in the air longer than any punch ever had. Philosophical, stripped down. Prison stripped away applause. It stripped away identity built on performance. Realization. Tyson realized the real battle wasn't surviving other inmates. Heavy. It was surviving the absence of who he used to be. Days turned into months. The training continued quietly. The conflicts decreased. Tyson began spending time in the library, reading philosophy, psychology, history. He wasn't trying to reinvent himself for cameras. There were no cameras. He was rebuilding, privately. One afternoon, during yard rotation, an argument erupted between two younger inmates. Voices escalated, a shove, then another. The crowd instinctively circled again. Tyson stepped forward. Not aggressively, not dramatically, just present. "Not worth it," he said calmly. One of the men snapped back, fueled by pride. "Stay out of it." Tyson didn't move. "Not worth it," he repeated. There was something different in his tone now. Not dominance, certainty. The moment stretched. Relief. Finally, one of the men stepped back, following, then the other. The circle broke. No punches thrown. That was the victory. If you've made it this far, it means you understand something deeper about this story. This isn't about prison fights. It's about internal battles. So if this story is giving you a new perspective, take a second right now to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Because stories like this aren't about fame, they're about transformation. Tyson's sentence eventually moved toward its end. Thoughtful. Release dates in prison are strange. They bring hope, but also fear. Reality. The outside world hadn't paused. It had continued without him. On his final week, the same faction leader approached once more. "You came in a target," he said. "You leave indifferent." Tyson nodded. "You fought," the man added. Tyson looked around the yard, at men lifting weights, reading, walking laps. "Yeah," he said quietly, "but not the way you think." The gates that once closed behind him would soon open, but prison had delivered something unexpected. Not just conflict, not just survival, perspective. The untold fights Mike Tyson faced in jail weren't all physical. The hardest ones were silent. choosing restraint over reaction, leadership over dominance, growth over ego. When the final door buzzed open and he stepped beyond the concrete walls, he wasn't the same fighter who walked in. And maybe that was the point. Because sometimes the greatest battles aren't won in arenas. They're won in cages. Freedom didn't feel like victory at first. It felt unfamiliar. When the final gate closed behind him and the air outside hit his face without bars in between, Tyson paused. Not because he was overwhelmed by cameras or noise. There weren't many. It was the quiet that struck him. The kind of quiet that comes when no one is watching, when there's no opponent across from you, no countdown clock ticking. Inside prison, survival was immediate. Outside, survival became psychological. Reporters speculated, critics judged, supporters waited to see if the old version would return. But the untold conflicts and fights Mike Tyson faced in jail had already reshaped something deeper than his public image. They had forced him to confront the one opponent he could never knock out: himself. The world expected headlines. They expected controversy. They expected chaos. But Tyson carried something different with him when he walked out. Discipline without spotlight. Control without applause. Strength without rage. He remembered Carter's question in the dark cell. Did you ever feel scared? Yes. He had been scared of losing identity, scared of becoming irrelevant, scared of silence. But prison taught him something brutal and honest. When you remove fame, remove money, remove power, what remains is character. And character can't be built in front of cameras. It has to be forged when nobody benefits from your improvement. There were fights in jail no one documented, not because they were hidden by officials, because they weren't physical enough to make headlines. Fights where Tyson chose to walk away. Fights where he swallowed pride. Fights where he prevented violence instead of escalating it. Those decisions never went viral, but they mattered. Months after his release, during a quiet interview, someone asked him what the hardest part of prison had been. They expected him to describe aggression, tension, threats. He surprised them. The hardest part, he said, was realizing I couldn't fight my way out of myself. That line carried more weight than any championship belt. Because here's the truth most people don't understand. The untold conflicts and fights Mike Tyson faced in jail weren't about proving he was still dangerous. They were about proving he could be controlled. Not by guards, not by factions, by himself. When the warden once told him he had influence whether he wanted it or not, that responsibility lingered. Influence isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet consistency. Sometimes it's refusing to throw the first punch. Sometimes it's choosing peace when your history says choose power. The inmates who once tested him eventually trained beside him. The factions that once questioned him eventually respected him. And the guards who once monitored him eventually trusted him to calm tension. That transformation wasn't dramatic. It was gradual. And that's why it was real. If this story has changed the way you see strength, if it's made you realize that the biggest battles happen inside, then don't just watch and move on. Subscribe to the channel, like this video. Drop a comment below and tell me what you think real strength means. Because this channel isn't just about stories of conflict, it's about growth through conflict. Mike Tyson entered prison with a reputation built on intimidation. He left with something far more difficult to earn: respect without fear. And maybe that's the fight that mattered most. Because sometimes the most powerful punch you can throw is restraint. And sometimes the greatest victory isn't defeating an opponent. It's defeating the version of yourself that needed one.